My family didn't just order dinner that night, they feasted like royalty. Lobster, imported steak, a $60 glass of wine they barely tasted. And when the bill hit $980, they all looked at me and laughed. He's basically our wallet. Their laughter echoed in that glittering restaurant while something inside me cracked. I smiled, nodded, excused myself for a quick call, stepped outside into the cold night air, and kept walking. I never went back to that table. And that was the night everything I thought I knew about family fell apart. My name is Axton Quinn, and what I'm about to share isn't just a story about money. It's about respect boundaries, and the moment you realize the people you love the most see you as something less than human. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comment so I know you're listening, or let me know where you're watching from. I love to see how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if my story already makes your heart ache even a little, please consider subscribing to the channel. It means more than you know to have someone out there who listens. Now this is my story. I was 30 years old, a financial analyst in Austin with a steady job, a modest apartment, and a family that treated luxury like oxygen. That night at Levon's Prime Bistro, the chandeliers glowed warm and gold, the jazz band hummed in the background, and every table seemed to sparkle under the soft lamplight. It was supposed to be a celebration, my parents' 30th wedding anniversary, but the moment I sat down, I already felt myself slipping back into the familiar role I never asked for. Dad Gregory Quinn wore the same air of authority he always carried, like the world owed him attention. Mom Celeste smiled sweetly at everyone while her eyes tracked every detail, always ready to twist an emotion if she needed to. Sierra, my older sister, examined the wine list as if choosing a financial investment, completely unaware of how careless she looked. And Knox, my younger brother, lounged comfortably, knowing he wouldn't have to lift a finger for anything tonight or any other night. When the server came by, I ordered the simplest entree, grilled salmon, because I always did. They, of course, went straight for the most expensive items on the menu. Dry-aged steak for Dad, lobster thermidor for Mom, a sushi platter for two for Sierra, even though she was alone, and a bottle of Napa Reserve that cost more than my grocery bill. And then Sierra, with her usual carelessness, laughed loudly enough for the next table to hear. "Oh, don't worry, Axton's basically our family wallet." She said it casually, like announcing the weather, while the server smiled awkwardly. Mom didn't even blink. Dad chuckled. Knox nodded as if it were a well-known fact. None of them questioned it. None of them cared how it landed on me. When the bill arrived, $980, they all paused, looked at me, and waited. Not a word. Just expectation. And for the first time in my life, I didn't move. Something old and heavy inside me, something I had been carrying for years, finally cracked. I stood up slowly, said I was taking a quick call, and pushed my chair back. They barely reacted. They thought I was stepping away for 2 minutes. They had no idea that before I walked in, I'd asked my best friend Elijah to call the restaurant and remove my saved card from their system. They had no idea I had already made my decision. The cold night air hit me the second I walked outside, and I didn't hesitate. I crossed the street, got into my car, and drove away without once looking back. When I parked in front of my apartment, my phone was buzzing nonstop, text after text, demanding to know why the bill couldn't be paid, what was wrong with my card, where I went. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't answer. I chose silence. And as I sat there in the dark car, I knew this single choice would change everything between me and my family. Back in my apartment, the quiet felt different, heavier, sharper, almost accusatory. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the glow of the screen while the memories began pulling themselves forward. My mind drifted back through the past few years, and I started seeing patterns I had refused to acknowledge. Knox's graduation trip to Vegas, over $2,000 on hotels, dinners, and shows. Sierra's dramatic breakup dinner where the entire family needed comfort, and somehow I was the one who paid a $700 bill. Thanksgiving in Malibu when everyone insisted a beachside villa would be healing, and I covered the entire rental. Different occasions, same ending, Axton pays. No hesitation, no gratitude. Just a quiet, unspoken expectation. I realized how deeply I had trained myself to believe it was my responsibility to keep the peace to smooth out every conflict with my credit card. Growing up, I watched my parents fight about money more times than I can count, and maybe some part of me learned that paying for things was how I prevented chaos. Maybe I thought it was how I kept the family together. But as I sat there now flipping through bank statements and receipts, the truth was harder to ignore. The total I had spent on them over the last 3 years was $117,640. I whispered the number aloud, and it sounded unreal, like it belonged to someone else, someone foolish. A knot tightened in my throat as I admitted something I never wanted to face. I had been terrified of being rejected. Terrified that if I stopped paying, they would stop caring. I wanted respect, but I was afraid to ask for it, afraid they'd tell me I didn't deserve it. And somehow, somewhere along the way, I confused loyalty with self-sacrifice. I confused love with obligation. Then another memory surfaced, Marie from work shaking her head at me one afternoon as we reviewed quarterly projections. "Your family is using you," she said plainly. "You know that, right?" I had laughed, brushed it off, repeated the line I'd told myself for years. Families take care of each other. But tonight, replaying her words, I finally heard them. Really heard them. And in the silence of my bathroom, staring at my own reflection, I realized I wasn't some noble son holding everyone together. I was the only person in the family who didn't see the truth. I had allowed them to treat me like a child with an unlimited duty, like someone who owed them forever. I rested my palms on the counter, breathing slowly as the truth sank in. For the first time, I whispered to myself, "Maybe I've been wrong all along." And for the first time, I understood that the real conflict hadn't even started yet. My family had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, I walked into the office with a strange numbness sitting just beneath my ribs. The building felt colder than usual. Or maybe it was just me. As soon as I sat down, my phone lit up with a long list of missed calls, 14 in total, and 27 messages from the family group chat. I didn't open them at first. I just stared at the glowing screen, feeling my jaw tighten. When I finally swiped through them one by one, the same pattern repeated itself. My father demanded an explanation for my behavior. My mother insisted the family had been humiliated by my absence and by the unpaid bill. Sierra threw in her usual bitterness, asking who I thought I was. Not a single message asked if I was okay, if something had happened, if I needed space. It was all about embarrassment, reputation, and the inconvenience I had caused. I set the phone face down on my desk and tried to lose myself in spreadsheets, but the tension kept winding tighter and tighter in my chest. By lunchtime, Elijah called. He didn't even say hello. "Man," he said, "your dad went off on the restaurant last night. He told the manager your card must have malfunctioned and called you irresponsible for leaving early." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as Elijah continued. He explained that my family never once mentioned me walking out. Instead, they blamed the restaurant, claimed the payment system must have been faulty, and demanded someone be held accountable. Hearing it laid out like that made everything inside me twist. They weren't upset that I left because I was overwhelmed. They were upset because they lost face. As Elijah kept talking, he added one more detail that hit me harder than anything else. My father had threatened to take legal action against the restaurant for tarnishing the Quinn name. That was when it finally settled in. My leaving hadn't even registered as a human reaction to pressure. To them, it was a public relations problem. I ended the call and sat there quietly, letting the truth sink deeper. A memory surfaced from years ago, the voice of my ex, Lauren. She once told me I didn't know how to say no to anyone, that one day I would collapse under the weight of everyone else's expectations. At the time, I brushed it off, convinced she didn't understand how families worked. But now her words replayed with uncomfortable clarity. I picked up my phone again, not to respond, but to look at the silence I was choosing to maintain. I finally whispered to myself, "They don't get to demand anything from me until they understand why I'm silent." For the first time in years, resolve, not guilt, settled into my chest. I turned off the notifications and leaned forward over my keyboard, focusing on the Henderson portfolio, as if my life depended on it. I knew a confrontation was coming. I just didn't know when. But I felt ready in a way I never had before. That confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. Late the following afternoon, after a long day detaching myself from every message buzzing through my muted phone, I went home intending to cook something simple and quiet. I had just set a pan on the stove when the doorbell rang 3 sharp presses back to back, the kind that signaled impatience rather than courtesy. I froze. Something in my gut already knew who it was. When I looked through the peephole, all 4 of them stood crowded in the hallway, Dad at the front, Mom beside him, Sierra with her arms crossed, and Knox standing behind them like he wished he could disappear. I hesitated only a moment before unlocking the door. Sierra pushed in first without waiting, moving like she owned the place. My parents followed immediately. Knox slipped in last, avoiding my eyes. None of them asked if they could come in. They spread through my small living room like an inspection team, Dad pacing, slowly running his hand across my bookshelf, Mom settling into my favorite chair, as if it were hers by default. I remained standing, watching them take over the space that had always been mine alone. Then the accusations began. Dad demanded to know why I abandoned the dinner and embarrassed the family. Mom's voice trembled as she accused me of making her look foolish in front of the waitstaff. Sierra rolled her eyes and called me childish for walking out without paying. Every word they fired at me made one thing clearer: they weren't here to understand. They were here to scold, to re-establish control, to assign blame. Not one of them asked why. Not one asked if I was overwhelmed or upset. It was all about how they looked. I took a slow breath and kept my voice as steady as I could. I told them plainly that I had paid for every family gathering for 3 years without anyone checking whether I could afford it or wanted to. Dad waved away my words and claimed I had only ever paid because I wanted to show off my success. That comment struck harder than he realized. I walked to my desk, pulled out the folder I'd prepared, and opened it on the coffee table. Sierra let out a sharp laugh the moment she saw the spreadsheets inside. "You made a whole document about this," she scoffed. "That's pathetic." Her reaction didn't shock me anymore. It only confirmed what I already knew: they had no intention of changing. To them, this spending pattern was law, and I was expected to obey it silently. But then Knox spoke, and his voice cracked a little. He said he always thought I liked paying for everything because Mom and Dad always said I had plenty and didn't mind. Hearing that broke something in me, not because it hurt, but because it revealed exactly how thoroughly my parents had rewritten the truth for my siblings. They had built an entire version of me that didn't exist, a version who enjoyed carrying everyone else. I closed the folder slowly and met every pair of eyes in the room. My voice sounded different to me, calm, final. I told them that from this moment on, I would not be paying for anyone else again. Not a dinner, not a vacation, not a single celebration. There was a long, tense silence before Sierra stormed out. Mom burst into louder tears, and Dad glared at me with a rage that felt almost personal. Knox stayed behind for a second, looking torn, but eventually followed. When the door finally closed, I stood alone in the quiet of my apartment. My heartbeat was steady, my breathing even. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had taken a step that actually belonged to me. And even though I knew this was only the beginning, something inside me felt stronger than it ever had before. The next morning, I showed up at the office earlier than usual, hoping the quiet would help settle everything stirring inside me. My phone buzzed non-stop inside my bag, but I switched it to silent without even checking the screen. For a moment, there was a surprising lightness in my chest, a thin breath of relief, but it came tangled with something sharper. I knew my family. They weren't going to let this go. During a meeting prep in the conference room, Marie glanced over at me with that look she saved for situations she knew were about to escalate. "What did they do now?" she asked. I told her just enough: the unexpected visit, the accusations, the things they threw at me as if I were a child acting out rather than an adult setting a boundary. Marie rested her elbows on the table and said, "If they show up here, you need to tell HR. You do not have to let them walk into your workplace and mess with your life." Her words hit harder than I expected. Somehow, I had never even considered they might cross that line, but as soon as she said it, I realized it wasn't impossible. They had crossed every other boundary. Why would work be any different? When I returned to my desk, a message from Lauren appeared on my screen. Seeing her name alone made my chest tighten. "We hadn't spoken in months," she wrote. "I heard what happened last night. Sierra told me everything. Can we meet?" I sat back in my chair, stunned that Sierra had spread the story so fast, and to Lauren of all people. I hesitated, but curiosity and a sense of unfinished business nudged me into agreeing. We met later that afternoon at a small cafe a few blocks from my office. The moment she sat down, she let out a sigh and said, "I need to tell you something. When I was still around your family, Sierra used to say, 'Axton has money, let him pay. A man should prove himself by his wallet.'" The words landed with a cold heaviness in my stomach. I knew my sister could be careless, but I didn't know they had talked about me like that, reducing everything I provided to some twisted test of masculinity. I felt foolish and angry, and something inside me shifted again, sharper and clearer than before. On my walk back to the office, my phone vibrated with a long email from my mother, almost 10 paragraphs. She listed every sacrifice she claimed to have made for me, described how hurt she was, and ended with, "If you still love this family, apologize to your father first." I stared at the screen, feeling a pinch in my chest that wasn't sadness but recognition. They didn't see me as an adult. They saw me as an obedient extension of who I used to be. I barely had time to digest it before Marie approached my desk again, her expression tight. "Your dad just called the office," she said quietly. "He asked to speak with your manager." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just about dinners anymore. They were willing to walk straight into my career, a place I had worked hard to protect, and drag their expectations across it. Something hardened inside me in that moment. I couldn't let this go any further. I opened my family group chat and typed, "We need to meet again. All of us. This can't continue." They responded almost instantly. I sat back knowing the next conversation would decide everything that came after. I chose Stanley's Diner for the meeting, a simple place with worn booths, laminated menus, and the kind of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed since sunrise. It wasn't glamorous, and that was the point. There were no chandeliers or fine wines to hide behind, just a table and the truth. I arrived 10 minutes early and picked a booth by the window. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept them clasped together, grounding myself. When my family walked in, the air seemed to shift. They approached with the same rigidity they carried into family meetings about taxes or holiday plans. Dad slid into the booth across from me without a greeting. Mom sat beside him, smoothing her skirt. Sierra crossed her arms tight over her chest. Knox kept his eyes fixed on the table. I reached into my folder and placed a sheet of paper in the center of the table. My voice remained steady as I explained what was written on it. From now on, separate checks, everyone paying for themselves. No comments about my spending or my lifestyle. No invitations disguised as financial expectations. If they wanted to see me, it had to be because they wanted me, not my wallet. Dad's reaction was immediate. He slammed his palm against the table, rattling the silverware. "You are ungrateful," he snapped, his eyes burning. "If you walk away from your family obligations, don't expect to be part of this family at all." For the first time, I saw the truth plainly. This wasn't about money. It was about control, about his authority, about me refusing to bend to it. Then something I never expected happened. Sierra's voice cracked as she said, "They always told us you liked being the hero, that you wanted to show off how successful you were." She looked at me with something close to confusion. "We didn't know you felt used." My breath caught. It was the first time she had ever questioned the narrative our parents had fed them. Then Knox spoke, and his voice shook slightly. "Dad, Mom, I think he's right. We lean on him too much. All of us." Hearing him side with me was like hearing a door finally creak open after years of being sealed shut. Mom leaned forward, eyes shining with that familiar wounded look. "If you loved me," she whispered, "you wouldn't humiliate us like this." This was the sentence I had spent my entire life obeying. The sentence that kept me small, quiet, ready to fix everything at my own expense. But now it felt like a chain I was finally strong enough to break. I stood up slowly, feeling a calmness settle over me. "Love can't grow out of fear," I said quietly. "I won't pay a single bill for anyone again. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be one built on respect, not expectation. I'm Axton, not your financial safety net." I stepped out of the booth and walked toward the exit. No one followed. No one called my name. For a moment I stood outside the diner, the late afternoon sun warm against my face, and I understood something with painful clarity. Nothing would ever be the same again. The 3 days after Stanley's diner stretched out longer than I expected. No calls, no messages, no passive-aggressive texts from Sierra, no emotional paragraphs from my mother. Nothing. It should have felt peaceful, and in some ways it did. But underneath the quiet was a tension that kept tightening, as if the silence itself were a warning. My family never stayed quiet unless they were getting ready for something bigger. By the third night, I had almost convinced myself they were finally letting me go. Then my phone rang. It was Knox. His voice was shaky, rushed, nothing like the calm, easy tone he usually had. "You need to come to the house," he said. "Something's wrong. Like, really wrong." I sat there for a moment, torn between anger, exhaustion, and a pull I couldn't explain. Despite everything, part of me still reacted when my family was in trouble. I grabbed my keys and drove through the quiet streets toward the Quinn house, feeling the weight of old memories pressing in as I approached the familiar driveway. Inside, the atmosphere felt completely different from every confrontation we'd had before. It wasn't loud or heated. It was eerily still. Dad sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at a stack of papers spread across the coffee table. Mom was perched beside him, wringing her hands. Sierra hovered near the dining table, looking uncharacteristically unsure of herself. The moment I saw the envelopes, the numbers, the red notices, I understood. They were credit statements, dozens of them. Dad finally lifted his head. His voice was flat when he admitted the truth. They were in serious trouble. A bad investment, one he hadn't told anyone about, had put the house at risk. He'd hidden it for months. He'd even taken Knox with him to try to get a loan, only to be denied. The weight of the situation hit me with a kind of déjà vu. Every time things spiraled, somehow I was expected to step in. They told me they had spent 3 days arguing about whether to ask me for help. Sierra wanted to call me immediately, insisting I always saved the family. Mom was terrified I would refuse and embarrass Dad further. Dad claimed he didn't ask for money, yet he had dragged Knox into the bank to salvage his pride. When all of that failed, they finally turned to me. Dad straightened up and pointed at the papers. "No matter what happened at that diner, you're still the one who carries this family. This is the moment you prove you're a man." Then he named the amount, $42,000. As if it were obvious I should provide it. As if everything that happened between us hadn't changed anything. My mother's tears started almost on cue. "We gave everything for you," she whispered. "Are you really going to let us lose our home?" That sentence had followed me all my life. It used to work. It used to shatter whatever resistance I had left. But now it only pulled forward every memory of being treated like a safety net instead of a son. For a moment I felt the old weakness pushing its way up, guilt, fear, the instinct to fix everything even if it broke me. But the memory of standing alone outside that diner pushed back. I took a breath, steady and deep, and said what I had never been able to say before. I told them I wasn't refusing because I didn't love them. I was refusing because years of being treated like a wallet, a backup plan, had taken something from me I could no longer allow them to drain. If I stepped in now, I would fall back into the same pattern, the same expectations, the same role they built around me. Dad suddenly shot to his feet and slammed his hand on the table. His voice shook the room as he yelled, "You are a disappointment to this family." It was the final blow, the sharp cut that severed everything I'd still been holding on to. My mother gasped, Sierra froze, and Knox, quiet, passive Knox, finally broke. He stepped in front of me and shouted back, "You did this, not him. You all drove him away." Hearing him defend me felt like the ground shifting. But even so, I knew the moment had already passed. I walked toward the door. Behind me, my father's voice thundered again. "If you walk out that door, don't come back." I kept going. My hand didn't even tremble on the doorknob. I stepped into the night air without looking back, feeling both the sting of something ending and the relief of finally choosing myself. I woke up late the next morning, my body still heavy from the emotional storm the night before. But when I opened my eyes to the quiet of my apartment, something in the air felt different. Lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't waking up to obligations or guilt. It was just me in a space that didn't demand anything from me. While drinking coffee, I checked my email and saw a message from Lauren. She told me she had once gone through the same cycle with her own family, that she knew the pain of being needed only for what she could provide. Her words were simple but clear: not everyone can be saved, and sometimes the only way people learn is when you stop rescuing them. Reading that made something settle inside me. I wasn't weak for stepping away. I wasn't cruel. I was finally stepping out of a role that should never have been mine. I sat at my desk and wrote a long email to my family. I told them I loved them, but I would no longer carry their debts, their crises, or their expectations. I was not their savior. I would not pay their bills or clean up their mistakes. If we were ever going to rebuild anything, it had to be from a place of respect, responsibility, and equality. I wouldn't accept anything less. The responses came slowly. Dad didn't reply at all. Sierra wrote 2 words: "Good luck," which was as close to a dismissal as she could manage. Mom sent a long message filled with sadness and regret, explaining she never meant to push me away but understood why I stepped back. And Knox called, his voice soft, as he asked if we could meet. We met at a small barbecue place by the river, one I used to take him to after school when he was younger. He looked older than I remembered, like someone who had finally seen past all the illusions we grew up with. He admitted he had lived under Mom and Dad's expectations for so long that he believed everything they said about me. He wanted to change that. He wanted to take responsibility for his own life. Hearing him say that made my chest tighten in a way that was almost hopeful. Then he told me something that tied everything together. Dad had always boasted to them that I loved paying for everything, that I wanted to prove how successful I was. It was the final piece of the puzzle. Dad wasn't just relying on me. He had rewritten the story so no one saw his dependence, and in doing so he erased my struggle entirely. For years, I hadn't just been used, I had been misunderstood, misrepresented, and reshaped into something convenient for them. I told Knox I wasn't angry at him. I told him I wouldn't return to the old dynamic, wouldn't pay anyone's way ever again. But if he truly wanted to build something real between us, I was here. He nodded and promised he would start taking care of his own life. I believed him. In the weeks that followed, I moved into a bigger apartment closer to the river, a place with sunlight in the mornings and quiet at night. Work improved too. Marie noticed the shift in me and told me I looked lighter, more grounded. Elijah celebrated with me over drinks and said, "You finally stepped into your own life." And for the first time, I felt that was true. One evening, as I was unpacking a box of books, my phone buzzed with a message from Mom. "I hope one day we can all sit together again the right way," she wrote. I replied simply, "When that day comes, I'll be there. But only when we are all free people, not bound by anyone's burden." Later, I stepped out onto my balcony. The breeze was cool, carrying the scent of the river, and the city lights shimmered in the distance. It felt like I was standing between 2 versions of myself, the one who spent years paying to be loved and the one who finally understood he didn't have to. I hadn't lost my family. Not really. What I lost was the illusion of what we were. And letting go of that allowed me to find myself again. I wish I could tell you that everything neatly wrapped up after that message to my mom, that we all sat around a table one Sunday, cried, hugged, and magically understood each other. That isn't what happened. Life didn't suddenly turn into a feel-good movie. My dad still hasn't called. My sister still keeps her distance, posting polished photos online like nothing ever happened. My mom sends the occasional text, careful, measured, like someone learning how to walk on a floor that just cracked under their feet. And Knox, he really is trying. He sends me pictures of his paycheck stubs, half joking, half proud. "I paid my own rent this month," he wrote once, like a kid showing off an A on his report card. Part of me aches that it took this long for us to get here. Another part of me is just grateful we got here at all. What changed the most wasn't them, it was me. For the first time, I wake up and my first thought isn't who needs me to fix something today. I go to work, come home, decide what to cook, who to see, what to save for, and every choice belongs to me. There's a quiet kind of power in knowing my money is finally a reflection of my life and my goals, not a bandage for everyone else's wounds. It's not about being selfish. It's about not disappearing. I used to think being a good son meant always saying yes. Yes to the dinners, yes to the trips, yes to the unexpected bills, yes to keeping the peace at any cost. I thought love meant absorbing every hit, swallowing every slight, handing over my card with a smile, no matter how much it hurt. Now I understand something I wish I'd learned years ago. Love without respect is just control dressed up in pretty words, and respect without boundaries is just permission for people to keep taking. There are still days when guilt creeps in. When I see an old family photo or pass by a restaurant we once ate at and feel that familiar pull, maybe I should have helped one more time. Maybe I went too far. Maybe I am the bad guy they say I am. But then I remember sitting at that table while they laughed and called me their wallet. I remember standing in my living room while they acted like my home was just another place they owned. I remember my father saying I was a disappointment because I wouldn't let them drain me dry, and the guilt quiets down. Because I know walking away from that version of my family is what allowed me to finally walk toward myself. If you're listening to this and any part of my story feels uncomfortably familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not an ATM. You are not a shield. You are not a tool for someone else's pride. You are a person. Your worth is not measured by how much you can pay to keep other people happy. Maybe in your story it's not dinners or vacations. Maybe it's bailing people out of trouble, always picking up the phone at 3 a.m., covering for someone else's mistakes at work, saying yes when every cell in your body is screaming no. Whatever form it takes, that feeling of being used leaves the same bruise. You're allowed to step back. You're allowed to say, I love you, but I won't do this anymore. You're allowed to choose peace over performance, self-respect over approval. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you stop being family. It just means you finally start being family to yourself too. If any of this hits close to home, I'd like to ask you something. Take a second and let me know you're here with me. Tell me in the comments if you've ever felt like the designated fixer, the one who pays, the one who smooths everything over so no one else has to feel uncomfortable. You don't have to share details if you don't want to. Even just writing, listening, or that's me is enough. Sometimes knowing someone else out there understands you're kind of tired can make the load feel a little lighter. And if you've been through something like this and made it out the other side, I'd really love to hear how you did it. What was your breaking point? What was the moment you realized things had to change, that you couldn't keep giving pieces of yourself away like they were nothing? Your story might be the one that helps someone else finally take that first step. If you've stayed with me all the way to this point, thank you. It means more than I can explain. Telling this story isn't easy. It's like reopening a scar that never fully faded. But knowing someone is on the other end listening, maybe nodding along, maybe seeing themselves in my words, that makes it worth it. If you can please consider subscribing. Not just for me, but for you and for anyone who has ever felt alone in a family full of people. I want this to be a place where stories like mine and yours can be told without shame. Where we can talk honestly about money, boundaries, love, and the complicated lines that run between them. Where we can admit that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from a table where you were never truly seen. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about a $980 bill or one dramatic dinner. It's about what you believe you deserve. It's about deciding that your heart, your time, your energy, and yes, your money have value. It's about finally standing up in your own life and saying, this is where it stops. This is where I begin. So if you're out there watching or listening and you feel that same pull I felt on that cold night outside the restaurant, I hope my story gives you a little courage, not to hate your family, not to cut everyone off out of anger, but to choose yourself in a way you maybe never have before, to understand that you are allowed to take up space in your own life. Thank you for being here. Thank you for hearing me. And if any part of you thinks I need to change something too, then maybe this was the bill life handed you so you could finally decide you're done paying for a version of yourself that was never real.